Hello everyone, hello Aces, this would be Teacher A for today. Aside from the modules that we already had before in grade 7 and grade 8, for today we'll be dealing with some of the free English lessons, particularly for those aspiring teachers who would like to take their demonstration teaching for private school or even for public school. Now, let's try to analyze one of the lessons in English 7, wherein you will be underlying different processes, different methodologies, and different approaches that are actually aligned in the K-12 curriculum. Now, usually in teaching English language, it's either grammar or literature, we always have these initial tasks. Initial tasks would be a springboard of your initial activity, your first activity, down to the content and evaluation. They are always important because this stimulates the processing system of your student. This will make them analyze the first part, then find out the connection of these initial tasks to the latter activities. Now, let's start. For the initial tasks, I'm actually suggesting you this bet on your character. It's a kind of activity wherein you ask your students, particularly grade 7, on which among these characters we have Doraemon, Hello Kitty, Majin Buu, Pea Shooter, and Son Goku. Among these characters, if they want to arrange this based on their favorite to the least one. Actually, on the original demonstration, these characters are holding some terms. Okay, but now let us assume that if your student arranged this based on their favorite character down to the least favorite, you will ask them to arrange them 1 to 5. Now, this would be a bet on your character activity. Actually, the main purpose of this one is to put themselves in the stories or in the cartoon and anime they already watched before, because we will be dealing with stories. That's the connection. Enabling your learners prior knowledge when it comes on the characters, then infuse this on the current lesson. Now, bet on your character would be our initial activity. Now, aside from that, according to K-12 curriculum, particularly in the PPST setup of the public school, they are actually looking for subject articulation or subject integration. We already knew about we can combine 3 or 4 or even 2 subjects in our content area. Now, if you are tasked to do articulation for English, you can articulate science, you can articulate araling panlipunan, you can articulate values education, and you can even articulate TLE and arts. Now, for this particular lesson, we'll be integrating or articulating araling panlipunan subject. Now, let's meet our guide. Okay, now for this part, I will be using Mr. Everest, quoted from the term Mount Everest, wherein it is the highest peak when it comes in Asia, one of the highest peak mountain found in the subject in Araling Panlipunan. That would be our articulation and involvement. Now, if we try to understand this part, okay, Mount Everest or Mr. Everest will be our guide. Now, for this part, your students will be asking what would be the connection of Mount Everest, the characters in the previous activity, to our lesson. Now, always put on your mind every activity, every symbols that you will be using on your demonstration, they should be aligned or parallel to the context. Now, if we try to continue, let's now proceed to the first slide, to the first theories. You will be providing what is plot. Plot concerns the organization of the main events of a work of fiction. Most plots will trace some process of change in which characters are caught up in a conflict that is eventually resolved. Now, for many students, they can easily identify the ending of the story. They can easily identify the setting of the story. They can also easily identify the characters involved. Now, plot would be a bit critical when it comes on their processing because it requires analyzation, it requires funneling down of the events. It may be burden for them to analyze everything one by one per scene or per event so that they can identify the plot. Now, plot is very important because it provides the systematic process or systematic arrangement of the events. With events that are logically arranged, it will not pause any story. Now, after discussing plot, we can now proceed to the next slide. Okay, you will be showing now plot diagram. How we can connect the previous picture if we have Mr. Everest our guide. Let us now use that mountain shape Mr. Everest as our plot diagram. We have here how many? Yes, we have 5 points wherein the hiker should proceed the station 1 down to station 5. Now, this symbol is not just a symbol that we get from the internet, but it provides you a different meaning later on. Now, as you try to observe, 1 is on the down line, 2 is a bit on the uphill, the 3 will be on the peak, the 4th station would be at the downline area, on the adjacent side, and the 5th one would be at the latter part. Now, plot diagram would be or very essential for our students to identify later on the content of plot. Now, let's start. We are always guided by our hiker and Mr. Everest, of course. Now, the first station would be exposition. This usually occurs at the beginning of a short story. Here, the characters are introduced. We also learn about the setting of the story. This action also presents other facts necessary to understanding the story. Now, when we say exposition, expose from the word itself. We are exposing the characters, we are introducing the setting of the story, and some other facts necessary in understanding of the entire story. Now, always remember in exposition, it is the beginning. We can find the characters, we can find the setting if it is on the mountain range, on an old village, a palace, or a city. We can also state here the weather condition if it is summer, if it's autumn, fall, or winter. We can also state here if it is in the prehistoric era, modern era, medieval era, or in the future one. That will be the substance when it comes on exposition that we need to identify. Now, we have here on the next slide an example of the exposition from the famous movie Finding Nemo. Now, in the exposition of the movie, the exposition of Finding Nemo introduces us to the main protagonist, Marlin, a clownfish. When we say protagonist, the main character. In Filipino, they call this as the bida. Marlin lived with his wife. They had many eggs. One day, a shark attacked Marlin and his wife. His wife was never seen again, and all the eggs were gone. Marlin found one egg, and that egg was named Nemo. Marlin raised Nemo alone. Okay, on this particular part of the movie, we introduces the character Marlin and Nemo, and based on the conversation or based on the information provided, because they are clownfish, definitely the setting would be under the sea. It's correct. Now let's see. On the following slide, we can identify the next point, the next station point. We have the rising action. From the word itself, rising. It is now escalating above. As we can see on our figure, it is escalating. Okay, rising action in definition includes all the events that lead to the climax. It also presents some type of conflict. Usually in rising action, we can identify the problem. We can see the what problem may we need to solve in the future. That would be rising action. Identifying the problem, introducing the problem would be on the rising action. Now, we have here the continuation and the Finding Nemo. Nemo is tired of living a safe and boring life with his father. He gets tired and starts swimming into deeper areas of the ocean to impress his friends, and he gets caught by fishermen. Now, on this rising action, we already introduced the problem. When Nemo eventually caught by a fisherman. That's our number one problem stated in the rising action. Now, let us proceed to the next point of our mountain, Mr. Everest. Oh, another continuation, I guess. Nemo's father, Marlin, goes looking for Nemo and meets another fish called Dory, who decides to help him find Nemo. Together, they fight sharks, go through groups of dangerous jellyfish, and meet turtles. Sometimes in rising action, we can also introduce another characters, not just on the in the beginning, not just on the exposition, but also in the rising action, we introduce some of the characters aside from the problem. Okay, let's proceed now to the third station. We have here, as we can see on our figure, Mr. Everest and the hiker. We are now on the highest peak. Now, Climax is also known as the high point. This is the turning point of the story. Usually, the main character comes face to face with the conflict. The main character will change in some way. Now, for the climax, we usually have the conflict. The problem is not actually being faced by the main character of the story. It is also the part wherein we ask ourselves if the characters or the main characters can push through with the struggles or not, if they can even find Nemo or not, or what will happen to Nemo and Marlin. Are they able to rescue Nemo from the fisherman or not? You will be asking yourself on this particular part, what will happen to the main character? That's why climax would be the exciting part, because you will be asking yourself if they will be achieving their goal. Now, for an example, same as with the Finding Nemo the movie, for the climax, Marlin finally finds Nemo, but after getting to know Dory and becoming good friends, Dory gets caught in a fishing net. That would be another problem. Nemo already rescued, but Dory got again in the fishing net, and they need to solve that again. Now, for the fourth station, we have here on the adjacent part of the mountain, in the slope, we have the mountaineer and Mr. Everest. The fourth station would be the falling action. On the falling action, all loose ends of the plot are tied up. The conflict or the conflicts and climax are taken care of. Actually, for this part, the story is subsiding when it comes in intensity, because the character eventually finds solution to address the problem in the climax introduced in the rising action. Falling action is somehow less intensity when it comes on the emotion, when it comes on the actions. Now, the example for the falling action based on the Finding Nemo the movie, Nemo swims into the net and tells all the fish to swim downward, breaking the pole and freeing everyone. As we can observe on this scenario of the movie, they eventually find solution in order to save Dory from the fishing net. We already introduced the solution of the problem. Now, another one, Marlin learns to trust Nemo, knowing that he's growing up and knows right from wrong. We can also eventually see the changes in the character, resolving their internal conflict with another characters. That's also part of the falling action. The intensity gradually become lesser. Now, for the last part of the mountain range, we have here the resolution. As we can see on our figure, on our plot diagram, we are on the last part, on the opposite side of the mountain. Now, the story comes to a reasonable ending. Okay, resolution would be the ending of the story. What happened to the story? What happened to the characters? What happened to the another characters, perhaps? Now, for an example of this, based on the Finding Nemo the movie, we have the resolution. Nemo, Dory, and Marlin return home together. Nemo earns Marlin's trust, and Dory and Marlin became great friends. That's a reasonable ending, or the resolution. Now, after discussing the parts of the plot, we can now have this activity. You will ask your student if they will be able to recall the parts of the plot. Okay, this should be based on the correct logical sequencing. For plot, we have the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, the resolution. Now, students need to have these in sequence, because having them in illogical sequencing or in different arrangement, it will require a lot of analysis again. You practice your students to have this in this particular order: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Another activity that you can provide, at least you ask your students on what particular or specific feature they can address or they can provide in exposition, what we can see on the rising action, what are the features of the climax, what we can see on the falling action, and even on the resolution. In that particular manner, you recall students' understanding of the theories you presented. You give them now a clap. Now, for another activity, am I picture perfect? This activity, you'll be providing a set of events, a set of scenario, then they will be labeling them according to the parts of the plot. Okay. For an example, we have here the story. We'll be using this story as our assessment, Jack and the Beanstalk. If your students already read or watched this story, that's advantage for them. But if your students haven't encountered this one, they can use their understanding of the parts of the plot in order to identify the arrangement later on. Okay, for this activity, you allow your students to have sufficient time. Now, we have here 5 boxes in different outline. We have the red outline box, the blue outline box, the yellow outline box, the green outline box, and the brown outline box. Then, you allow your students to immerse themselves in this particular slide, analyze each box, and the examples or the statement and scenarios include integrated in each box, so that they will be identifying later on what particular parts of the plot they should be in. As easy as that. Now, if you want another example, you can craft different events. You can get different events from another stories. Famous stories will do, so that they can participate well. You provide sufficient time, then ask them later on, or this blue box, if we try to label this one, what particular parts of the plot it should be. Now, in teaching parts of the plot, you should be a bit creative. You try to provide examples that are actually familiar with your students, so that they can participate well. And on the latter assessment, you can provide some of the stories that are not too popular, so that they will try to analyze them well. Okay, that would be our free lesson for English lessons today, and I do hope that you will learn. And please do subscribe, so that you will be notified every time that we will be providing lessons, lectures, ESL, online job reviews. That will be all. Goodbye, aces. Thank you, everyone. Happy learning and keep safe.